Evening, everyone. So I thought this evening we could talk about the various scandals that are just happening right now. The ones I want to go over, but I've seen some in the comments as well, which I will discuss as well. The sort of the tidal wave of sleaze. You would think Rishi Sunak, there's another problem dealt with. Raab's resigned. That was hanging over him. So maybe he can have a little bit of breathing space before the next scandal. No, the scandals are all over the place. So we now have to take stock. Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister for... It's not even 6 months, is it? Is it? It's about 6 months. End of October, about 6 months. And he's had to sack 3 cabinet ministers. I don't mean like moving them around, reshuffle, and then if one leaves, that's technically a sacking. I mean proper sacking. Proper, like 2 for bullying and 1 for fiddling his taxes to the tune of millions of pounds. When Raab goes, he appoints Oliver Dowden as his deputy. Now, in some ways, this is quite an interesting appointment. Oliver Dowden is someone that Rishi Sunak would want to have as his deputy prime minister. So that indicates, I have said this in the past, Keir Starmer, when he set up his first shadow cabinet, all very usual. It was like trying to sort of have a nod to various factions. But over time, as he's established his authority, he has been able to promote the people that he thinks are generally the best. It still represents a cross-section of the party, but into the most senior positions, he's got the people who think they are up to the job, rather than having to give a few choice positions to people for the sake of unity. So Sunak... Oh, the volume's quiet. Oh, no, don't say that. Don't say that. I really don't know why that would be, because I don't think there's a lot I could do about it. If it is, it should be okay. Other people can say about the volume, but I'm not sure there's a lot I can do. Let me just see if I can ramp that up a little. I'm not sure if there's much else I can do, I'm afraid. I have just got a new computer. So, and I hate Windows 11 every day since I installed this new computer. I've hated it all over again. Okay, we'll just have to see how it goes. Where was I? So Oliver Dowden, yeah. So Oliver Dowden is much more of a conservative. You sort of imagine a more, what we might call a moderate Conservative Party, very different to the one we've got now. More like a sort of John Major Conservative Party. Someone like Oliver Dowden could be in that. That would make sense. So Rishi Sunak has basically appointed someone who's not a raging lunatic. However, Oliver Dowden is also a bit of a non-entity. He's not a big hitter. For example, I was saying yesterday when he had appointed Dowden as his deputy, and someone said, I don't really know who he is. And I said, oh yeah, he's only been in the cabinet for the last 3 years. He's been at the top of the government for years. That lots of people won't know who he is doesn't surprise me. He's not really made an impact. But the thing is, in terms of scandals, he was the culture secretary that appointed Richard Sharp. Now, for those who don't know or have forgotten, Richard Sharp is the chair of the BBC. And it has emerged that he was given the position a few days after he arranged a very large loan for Boris Johnson. And there's a report that's supposed to be being released very soon, which is going to be quite damning of Richard Sharp. Basically, I think there are people suggesting that Richard Sharp's position as BBC chair is likely to become quite untenable. And the focus will then turn to the people who appointed him. Oliver... In theory, it was Boris Johnson's appointment. Boris Johnson's the Prime Minister. Just like the decision to get rid of... If it becomes too much and Richard Sharp doesn't resign and needs to be sacked, that will actually be Rishi Sunak who effectively has to do it. But in theory, it's the Culture Secretary. And Oliver Dowden was the Culture Secretary who appointed him. And Oliver Dowden was the Culture Secretary who appointed him after having been warned about various things. So Rishi Sunak has appointed someone to be his deputy, whom he will consider a close political ally, a big backer of his, but nonetheless someone who is also embroiled in scandal. You've just been listening to a load of names I don't know from Second Thought. They've given me an idea that Corbyn should have come after Starmer so the latter could have primed the public. I don't even know what that means. Right, let's go back to some of the comments at the start, because there were a few which were related to these things. But I want to go about the Suella Braverman thing as well. That's not really been mentioned much in the news, but that's quite... I suppose it's quite minor, but for me it's sort of, you know, just speaks of their sort of attitude at the moment. So Matthew's asked a good question here. So why did Sunak sack Raab when Johnson didn't sack Patel? Johnson didn't face any significant backlash for not sacking Patel. No, that's the point. The situation has changed. So when Priti Patel was found to have bullied, the political situation was very different. That was pre-Owen Paterson scandal. Ever since Boris Johnson tried to get Owen Paterson off and it completely blew up in his face, the Labour have been managing to make the one rule for them, another for the rest of us line really stick. And ultimately that's what sort of got rid of Boris Johnson, very poor appointments. But that's why Rishi Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, said that he was going to bring integrity and professionalism back. Now, he hasn't, of course, but you could understand his reason for wanting to try and convince people that he had, because the Conservatives, the wider Conservative Party, are very aware that he has... they've got a huge problem with Tory Sleaze at the moment. The public there was a real backlash to the Owen Paterson scandal. You think, well, why is that? No one really knew who Owen Paterson was. Quite a lot of people in his own constituency may not have known who he was, but around the country they certainly didn't. Why was it such a big deal? Because it was trying to get off his mate for doing wrong. And then Partygate blew up. It was just another thing. One rule for you, another for the rest of us. And Labour were using that, and it was really hurting the Conservatives. So Rishi Sunak has to try and fight against this like tide of sleaze, which is not helped by the fact he's been investigating himself now. So that is why there was no question that Sunak would be able to allow Raab to carry on, because then all of his talk of integrity disappears out the window, and they know that the public care about it now. They haven't done in the past, it's true. They haven't done in the past, but now they're really, upset by it. How long before Raab is given a new ministerial position? Well, he may never be given a new ministerial position now. The usual procedure is when you have to resign from government, if you're a big hitter, if you're someone where the Prime Minister let you go reluctantly, they'd have rather you stayed, you just apologise, you talk about, I didn't really mean it. Like, Raab could have taken the line, which he has anyway, amongst all of his other whining. He could have just said, look, I didn't really realise, I just thought, I was being hard because, I have high expectations of the country. He could have come all that, which he did, but then at the end of it, what he actually chose to do and say, they're all soft, they should just piss off. Whereas what he should have said is, look, I can see that it's not gone quite right. I need to go off and reflect a little bit here. And he could have done that and a few months later come back into the government. The problem now is he's showing no contrition at all. So if Sunak brings him back, even in 6 months' time, which is pointless, if he brings him back now, or at any point in the immediate future, he's bringing back an unrepentant bully. That's the real issue. He's unrepentant. So it's he may never. And obviously Dominic Raab is far too conceited to accept a junior ministerial position and work his way back up. He will only accept a cabinet position. So he may not now. That may be it. And I'm asking there, do I think Raab will lose his seat? Yeah. I will absolutely think he will lose it. He only just won it 2019. Put it this way, any Conservative MPs who only just won their seat in 2019, when Labour were having their worst ever result, is almost certain to lose it in 2024. You know, if we knew nothing else, because the Conservatives are now much less popular and the other parties are going to be more popular. Raab is almost certain to lose his seat to the Liberal Democrats. You know, he's in one of those seats as well that just over time, I said in a video today, he's in one of those seats which over time, there's been an influx of the sort of people who would normally live in the cities, but it's too expensive. Ironically, because the Conservatives haven't been building affordable housing, there's lots of people from the cities are now moving out to these sort of areas who are much more in tune with the Liberal Democrats or the Greens or the Labour Party. But in terms of like affecting constituency results, the Liberal Democrats or Labour. So they've not done themselves any favours, ironically. James saying that I thought he resigned. If you talk about Raab, he did resign, but he didn't want to. He basically jumped before he was pushed. You know, there was, I mean, we're not going to find out for some time if we can ever believe any account, but there was obviously a huge back and forth. Downing Street denied that Rishi Sunak had been talking to Dominic Raab. Absolute cobblers. Of course you would. As soon as the report's out, there's no need for confidence. You know, of course, Rishi Sunak would have been straight on to Dominic Raab or vice versa. Of course they would. So Sunak was clearly basically going, look, we will trash our reputation if you stay. Dominic Raab was trying to come up with reasons to keep him. Like, you know, what I gathered was, you know, from correspondents who were talking to people involved, the argument was very much, we can use it as a culture war. We can use this as a new plank in our culture wars. You know, woke. We're taking on the woke lefties in Westminster. But it was just desperate stuff. If Rishi Sunak had kept him on, it would have been absolutely ruinous for his. He wouldn't have. There'd have been no. It's like there would have been no point in sacking Nadim Zahawi. I mean, probably Gavin Williamson had to go because it was Tory MPs he was bullying. So it was, you know, but like he wouldn't have had to let Nadim Zahawi go. You know, there's other ones who may be for the chop later. His integrity platform just crumbles if it had kept Raab on. So Raab had to go, and it was obviously put to him, it's better if he resigns than is sacked. Sunak was maybe getting to the point where he was saying, I am prepared to sack you because we can't do this, but it'll look better for you if you resign. So that, and they almost always resign, almost always. Sorry, Skedder, I really don't know what you're I know you're using English words there, but I cannot comprehend what you're trying to say. You say the Tories have shifted the Overton window to the right amongst the general public. No, I think you're getting things wrong there. But we're not discussing that this evening anyway. Not only is Raab unrepentant, but he's rubbishing the civil service at the same time. Who will want to work with him now? Well, that was another thing. I mean, if he ever did come back, he wouldn't be able to come. Whatever department he came back to would be utterly dysfunctional, because if it was back to one of his old ones, they wouldn't, you know, the decent officials wouldn't want to work there. And if he comes back unrepentant, it's like he's vindicated. In his own mind, he'll think to himself, Sunak has come around to my way of thinking, and so he will carry on as he did before. So I don't think he will now, just because of time. I don't think enough time can pass before Sunak can let him back in. And what's the point of him bringing him back at the end of the year or early next year? Because they're going into a general election then. There's no point. And I'd still be very, very surprised. I know there's people keep saying autumn general election. No, it might be, maybe. I just see too many disadvantages in autumn compared to May. But, you know, we'll see how it goes. As I say, it could well be the Conservatives are aiming for autumn, but are making sure they're ready to go in May or June if necessary. Raab's not a bully. Bullies target individuals. He's a sociopath who is drunk on power. I know, I don't agree with that. No, bullies, absolutely. Bullies... So all a bully is, like, lots of people in life want to raise themselves up above others. You know, we're a weird species. Well, not weird, but we're a pack animal, aren't we? So mostly we have this conformist nature, but we also have a hierarchy. So you want to, on the one hand, conform, but on the other hand, move up the hierarchy. And there are people who do that by working harder, helping others, you know, basically being more valuable to their community, society, whatever. And there are other people who just feel they're just so entitled that what they do instead is just to say, no, I'll drag others down. So they drag others down. It's classic bullying behaviour, Raab. It's just different. A lot of people think of bullying as playground bullying. Now, in the playground, it's very different, because all a playground bully can do to their peers is physically intimidate them. They can call them names, backed up by the gun or whatever, but ultimately it's like physical intimidation, usually. Or the name calling, I suppose. But in a workplace, it's different, because your bully in your workplace can be softly spoken. They don't have to shout. They don't even have to throw tomatoes at you. There doesn't have to be any physical intimidation, because that person can threaten your career. That's your livelihood. You know, in the school ground, no bully can, you know, a bullied child isn't going to not have dinner because of what the bully does. They're not going to not have a roof over their head because of what the bully does. You know, it's more primal than that. Whereas it doesn't have to be quite like that in the workplace. It's more insidious in the workplace. But anyway, Simon there says platform has integrity. Sunak's, well, it doesn't really, but he's given the show of it. That's what I mean. And it is working, otherwise he'd have abandoned it. If it wasn't working, if the public was seeing him, do you know what? Raab would have stayed on if Sunak's pretense at integrity wasn't working, because they'd have just said, look, it's not working, let's sod it, and keep him on anyway. But, you know, so I'll go to the next one. So, the Braverman, Suella Braverman, have people heard this? So Suella Braverman, so she's the Home Secretary, by the way. She's in charge of the police, right? So she's broken the law recently. It is one of those which amongst the public's not going to get much cut through, because it's a speeding offence, right? So she's been caught speeding. And there's lots of people, disappointingly, don't really come. And I know you can, in theory, be in a situation where you could just tip over and then get hit by a speed trap. Okay, sure. But here's the thing. She asked if she could put the fine on expenses. So the Home Secretary broke criminal law, albeit one that the public at large are not going to be that aggrieved about, because a lot of people don't really, because a lot of people speed themselves or don't really consider it a serious offence. Well, I suppose it's on the grand scale, it's probably not as serious as some. But she's asked the taxpayer to pay her fine. Obviously, she's been told no. But I say obviously, but she asked. I mean, can you believe that? Like, it wouldn't even be that much of a fine, would it? What's a fine? I don't even know how far. I suppose it depends on just how much she was speeding, doesn't it? But let's say it's like £100 or something. Someone as wealthy as her. I look pale. Yeah, that's because, again, it's going to take me ages to reset this. So it's brand new computer, and I hate Windows. Have I mentioned I hate Windows 11? I thought I'll give it a go. No one's complained about Windows 11. It might be all right. It's not all right. Anyway, I'll get used to it. But yeah, it's. I say obvious. She's very rich. £100. Like, if I had to pay out £100, I would just pay out £100. She's much richer than I am, and yet, so it's that sense of entitlement. She can easily afford it. It's not like, oh, this is actually going to be quite tight. Can I try and wangle some way of getting someone else to pay for it? She's just immediately thought, will the taxpayer pay for the fine that I accrued from speeding, from breaking the law? I can't get over that. I cannot actually understand why I'm not seeing this really in the news. And it is true, because I've seen a Conservative MP comment on it. William Ragg commented on it on Twitter. Very obvious. What obvious dangers for Labour from the Tories can I see happening in the run-up to the general election? It is very difficult at the moment, because, first of all, like, you'd think from the way the Tory media are presenting things, that Rishi Sunak's on the road back to glory. You'd think, oh yeah, the polls are going to flip any time now. And you look at the polls, it's like, no, not at all. There's barely any movement. obviously he's rescued a lot of the damage that was done by Truss. But if you think about the major issues that the voters are going to be deciding on, so first of all, the economy. Now, obviously, we know that next year's budget is going to loosen the purse strings, but it's very difficult for him to do anything that makes people feel better. It'll be like it'll be like strangling someone, then easing the pressure a little bit, but their hand's still round your throat. So even though they're obviously going to play pork barrel politics in next year's budget, I can't really see, because they can't do anything too reckless, because you might think, well, let's just knock 5p off the income tax. But then the Office of Budgetary Responsibility will sound the alarm bells. So their budget has to be sort of, it has to be a relatively sensible one by their standards. So I can't see how they're going to win the economic battle, even with a budget designed to get voters to think more kindly of them. Healthcare, I mean, that's the latest plan of the health secretary is to take take nurses to court. So now he believes that the next set of planned strikes by nurses, I believe it is, are illegal. Now, okay, if you think they are illegal, fine, seek a judicial review, whatever. But if your plan is to take nurses to court, you're not actually going to improve the NHS in the next year or so, are you? Then what else is there? Then there's their own little hobby horse, immigration and asylum. That's not going to look any better, is it? Yes, they'll blame people. Oh, they'll be happy to blame people. But people are going to be pointing out, you've been in power, by next year, you've been in power for 14 years. 14 years. And you're also moaning about a problem that didn't exist 4 years ago. So although there will be individual things for Labour to watch out for, such as, for example, Rishi Sunak. I mean, notice Rishi Sunak had a bit of a clear out of the, okay, he probably didn't want to get rid of Gavin Williamson, but Dominic Raab is an arsehole and the public don't really warm to him. Nadim Zahawi, same sort of thing. He could afford to do without them. If he can manage to get rid of Suella Braverman as well, all to the better. We'll have to see on that one. It's only, but beyond the usual tricks, I'm not seeing it. Like, ultimately, by the time the election's on next year, the Conservatives will have been in power for 14 years. 14 years. Everything's broken. It's not like 14, because naturally after 14 years, people will start to think, do we need a change now? Maybe I would argue after 13 years of the last Labour government, people got too comfortable and thought, we should have better, particularly after the global crash. But this time it's like everything's broken and everything hurts. Interest rates are going up again. That means people's mortgages are going up again. And it's just an absolute, I cannot, inflation, although it will come down, people will know that, like, people think, here's the thing, here's where the Tories are going to be trapped by their own lies. There was a poll done recently. There's a lot of people think that if you halve inflation, that the price comes down. So here's the thing, they get to next year, Rishi Sunak's boasting about how he's reduced inflation, and people will be saying, but the price is still going up. So they'll think he's lying. That's the beauty of it. Sunak's arguably going to be trapped in his own lies, because he will be going, oh, I've reduced inflation for you. And the sensible people go, yeah, but it's still above the level of my income increases, so I'm still finding it harder to afford the cost of living. But the real idiots out there will think, but my bills are still going up, so you're lying. So although Labour do have to be very, very careful, I can say, as someone who's not involved in their campaign, I can feel fairly comfortable that Labour are going to win. I just don't know how big the majority is going to be. I mean, the problem is a lot of people think that it's all going a bit wrong for Labour at the moment because, they can remember polls that said that they were going to win by they were going to have a majority of 200 or 300 or something. I mean, that was never going to happen. I said at the time, I said so many times, that is not going to happen. When we get to the actual election, the Tories are not stupid enough to allow themselves to be in a position where they're going to get wiped out. You know, Labour can win a majority. Labour get a majority of 50. That's all right. Can work with that. 60 is more comfortable. But at the moment, you could still see them getting a majority of 100, which would be loads. You don't need a majority. You don't need a majority of 100. The Conservatives don't have a majority of 100. But anyway, let's have a look. In light of recent issues related to Ofsted, do I think we can be marking the performance of our MPs as outstanding, good, needs improvement, or inadequate? Definitely inadequate. In need of special measures, basically. I mean, serious, even not being party political here, can anyone think of, like, I will always, with any Conservative government, think a Labour government will do better, and I think I can back that up with facts, with actual records. But right now, honestly, is there anything that's working? If you go down government department by department, is there any department that's actually working? There isn't, is there? Being honest, there isn't. It's a bit like asking for Brexit benefits. You know, you say to someone who supports Brexit, give me one tangible benefit of Brexit, and they'll either not be able to, or they will lie, something like vaccine stuff, and you can disprove the lie then, and then they've got nothing. So no one has yet come up with a tangible benefit to Brexit. In Britain, that is. There are some outside of Britain, but in Britain. But the same thing could be said of the Conservatives. Name me one thing that after 13 years of the Conservatives, name me one thing that's better than it was 13 years ago. Honestly, I do not think there is. Corruption's working, if I count that, Phil. Well, I mean working for the people, don't I? I mean working for society. Honestly, objectively, there is nothing right now that is working better than 13 years ago. No area of government policy is working better now than 13 years ago. And I cannot understand for the life of me how anyone could seriously think that unless Labour really drop a bollock, that they are going to lose. And what I would say is, although, you know, if you look at these attack ads, and I've said before, the first two I thought were dodgy. The other ones have been absolutely fine. There's another one coming out as well on sewage. So they're going to keep plugging at it. The reason why I still say that I don't approve of them is because it's the first two. The rest are absolutely fine. The first two basically heavily imply that if anyone is convicted of certain crimes and doesn't go to prison, that the government have failed. Or that the government supports that type of criminal. That I just think is going to bite Labour on the arse in government. However, just the general idea that Labour can come up with these attack ads, and the first two were very dodgy, and yet you haven't really seen, apart from the usual crowd who will complain about anything Labour does, the SCG, outside of the SCG, what has there really been? Labour MPs, even the ones who don't really like it, are not coming out and saying that they don't like it. So the Labour Party Labour MPs are really united here, because that for me is a bit of a test of unity. You know, they're pushing it there, and yet they're all still just focused on winning the election. James, I thought the next general election had to take place no later than 28th of January 2025. The last parliament ended in December, blah, blah, blah. Had to take 5 years and a certain number of days. Yeah, so that's correct. So what happens is the government can call a general... I mean, if the Fixed Terms Parliament Act had remained in, it would definitely have been next May. Just the law would have said it would be next May. But then they removed it, so it can be like 5 years. So what happens is the government can call an election any time before 5 years after the last one. If they don't call an election at all, then an election process is automatically begun 5 years after the previous one, but there's a period of so many weeks, can't remember if it's 6 or 7, there's a period of so many weeks when an election is called before the election takes place. So that means realistically there is a certain date in January, I'll take your word for it if you've got the right one, but there is a certain date in January 2025 when in theory the Conservatives could remain in power. However, I powerfully don't believe they will want to do that. They can't be asked with another winter election. They got away with it last time, not because it was in winter, but because they had several factors going their way. Winter didn't help them. It just didn't hinder them. Whereas if they tried it again in winter, it would. The NHS would be collapsing. Old people would be maybe less inclined, particularly if they're not really happy with the Conservatives, would be less inclined to brave the crap weather to go and vote. No, they won't hold it in winter. I'm quite sure of that. What can Labour do with an economy that's in a complete mess? So, I mean, there's two sides of that. The first is, yes, the economy will be in a very bad state, and that will make investment much more difficult. The flip side to it, the optimists look at it though, is when the Conservatives are getting every economic decision wrong, I think it's fair to say, broadly speaking, they are getting every economic decision wrong, it's relatively easy to make small improvements and get big changes. You know, I always go back to this story years ago when there was a colleague of mine, a younger teacher, and he was getting a promotion. He was going to be a head of department somewhere else, miles away, going to another college. And he confided in me before he left that he was quite worried. He was daunted at the prospect. And I asked him, coming back to Ofsted rating, I said, well, what sort of college is it? What's its Ofsted rating? He says a 3, which is basically not really good enough, but it's not disastrous. And I said, that's grand, that's great. Perfect, I said. Because the thing is, when you go into a college, if you're going to become like a manager in a college, say, it applies to any sort of department. If it's not working terribly well, you can make small tweaks to improve things and see instant results. And so you look like you're doing some good. Whereas if you go into a department that's already doing really well, the best you can do is maintain that level, and it's really hard to maintain it. Like if you go into a school department, a college or something that's rated 1, outstanding, there's nowhere else to go above it, so you can't possibly improve on that. All you can do is maintain it, and it's really hard to maintain it. So the same thing with the economy. The fact that the economy is doing really badly, it doesn't give Labour much scope for massive investment to begin with, but it does give them the scope to make relatively small changes quickly that show instant results. So I say instant results, as instant as you can realistically get with economic data. Can Labour start discussing tactics with unions, industry and EU to help develop a strategy to help the economy so they have everything in place? So inevitably, when they are in government, they of course will be. They will be having constant discussions with the EU as to how to reduce trade barriers. Remember, I know Labour are having to say no to rejoin the EU, customs union, single market, but nothing else is off the table from them. And there's still, I know those are the big things. There's quite a lot you can do to reduce trade barriers within those constraints. So there's a lot they can do quite early on. And remember, the Trading Cooperation Agreement itself, they're going to have to start talking about that in 2025. That's up for rediscussion. I know David Hennig is a trade expert. He's going, people are overblowing how much change there might be. And it's like, yeah, but we will see. We will see. But it gives Labour the opportunity to basically have a lot of discussions with the EU about how to reduce trade barriers as much as they can. Obviously, as long as we remain outside of the customs union, there's going to be customs declarations needed. That's extra paperwork and hassle. As long as we remain outside the single market, there's going to be standards documentation needed, which costs and again needs checking. So, you know, there are going to be, we're never going to be able to like really take off with our economy again until we sort those issues out, because people like me will always compare it with what it was like before Brexit. But the good thing for Labour, purely strategically, is that they get to compare it. They can compare whenever they like. All they need to do is compare it to how it was under the Conservatives, which can be 20. They can compare it to the 2024 economic figures or 2023. They can take the pick. They could say 2023, the tax year 20. Again, depending on when the election is. But anyway. Is that somewhat illusionary though? Labour can't just rest on laurels. No, Labour can't. I can. Labour absolutely can't. The people who are at the sharp end, you know, the Labour leadership, MPs, councillors, strategists, all the people actually deciding and doing the work for Labour, they can't rest on their laurels at all. They have to fight for every single vote. But I am that's like, you know, a football team being 3-0 up at half time and going back on the pitch. They can't sit back, otherwise they could still lose it. But as a supporter of that team in the stands who can't influence things, I could then feel confident that my team's going to win at the final whistle. People on strike for better pay. Braverman wants to put the fine on expenses, absolutely no clue on reality. No, indeed. And that's why I cannot understand why people are not making a big issue of this, because it's not the fact that she got a speeding fine that's the issue for most people. You know, what would be an issue, again, it's that one rule for us. Like, if anyone else had got a speeding fine, they would have to pay it, wouldn't they? She wanted the taxpayer to pay it. I can't understand why people aren't making something of that. My dog gets better healthcare than I do. Do you know what? Yeah, actually, you could get round here. See, it's actually quite difficult to get a vet where I am. There are definitely, you can see the vet shortages, but there are vets we could get to. We could go to Scunthorpe, for example. If we had an issue, in fact, we have had issues with our pets. When we've had an issue, we have been able to get them to see a vet very quickly. You can't always say the same thing if we had a similar injury or illness. So it is actually probably true that literally a dog has better access to healthcare than we do, albeit that dog's healthcare is private. So you could argue, you know, if we had our own private healthcare, I mean, some people here may do, but you know, for those who have private healthcare, maybe it's not as bad. But certainly our pets do have better healthcare than those of us using the NHS. Oh, you have to travel over 20 miles to find a vet. Okay. It's not that bad for me. It's basically... How many miles away would it be? Actually, it could be 15 miles, thinking about it. Stella Creasy seems to be pretty damn good in debate. Not afraid of being an open rejoiner. Should she be given more prominence? That's probably why you could... There are certain MPs who are actually really good backbenchers, and they will always be really good backbenchers, and that's probably the best way. The thing is, ministerial responsibility applies to the shadow ministers as well. So the beauty of backbenchers is that they can, you know, say things that a minister couldn't. If Stella Creasy were to be, certainly if she was to be a very senior member of the Labour leadership, she wouldn't be able to say those things. So it's actually better, for certain people to be in that position. And she may well be perfectly happy in that position as well, because it gives her the ability to speak freely like that. But in a way that's not, you know, what I like about her is she's not doing it in a way that harms Labour's chances in the election. Can I please break down exactly what would happen if the UK was to leave the ECHR? How bad would it be? Okay, so let's go through it really simply. So first of all, the European Court of Human Rights is a court. You don't just leave a court, do you? So you'd have to leave the organisation in which that court exists. So you're talking about leaving the Council for Europe. We would then be the only country in Europe outside of the Council of Europe, apart from Belarus and Russia, if you count that as being in Europe, although it's a bit weird. But part of it's certainly in Europe, isn't it? So you'd be talking about leaving the Council of Europe. But it goes beyond that, because here's the thing. Why are some Conservatives trying to say we should leave the European Court of Human Rights? Because they don't like the fact that international law, which we can't change on our own, stops us demonising refugees. So if we did leave the Council of Europe, we would that doesn't mean international law regarding refugees ceases to exist, because what is the international law that they are particularly concerned with? It's the UN's Refugee Convention, which we are a signatory to. So we would still be subject to laws that stop us treating refugees in the way that these people wish to treat refugees. So in actual fact, what would happen is, let's assume these people actually captured control of the government and they actually put these, let's imagine that the next election, let's just go crazy here, let's just say Reform UK won 400 seats, so they're going to form the government, right, with a massive majority. Okay, so they now going to follow through on this, right? So they leave the Council. It transpires that there's no such thing as leaving the European Court of Human Rights. You leave the Council of Europe, fine, they leave the Council of Europe. Then those laws still apply. So you know the next step, we have to leave the UN. So the natural trajectory of this nonsense is having to leave the United Nations. Which means we lose our seat on the UN, our permanent seat on the UN Security Council automatically, because we're no longer part of the UN. Let's see how they do they realise that? Actually, I wonder if because some of these gammons, you know, do they realise that in actual fact to do what they're suggesting means having to lose to relinquish our place on the UN Security Council? But anyway, but that's the consequence. That is the natural consequence, because they're saying it as if. So they first of all tried to say, "Oh, we've got a problem with refugees. We need to leave the EU." And you point out that the refugees that the likes of UKIP at the time were complaining about were not from the EU. So we need to leave the EU. How does that? Okay. So we leave the EU. Oh, now the problem's even worse. Is it? Do you think that's because the Dublin Agreement eased the problem that you identify? So we leave the Dublin Agreement because we leave the EU, and now the problem's much worse. Oh, so now we need to leave the European Court of Human Rights. Funny how they didn't mention that years ago. But there is no, as I say, there's no such thing. You leave the Council of Europe. Then it transpires, the Refugee Convention still applies. Yeah, because that's a UN convention that we have signed up to. Oh, well, we'll best leave the UN then. Then we give up our place on the UN Security Council. Oh. But no one says this to people, because the media, maddeningly, even the media that is not directly owned by billionaire conservatives like the BBC, don't think to say to people, this is what they're saying. The natural consequence of leaving the European Court of Human Rights is to surrender our position on the UN Security Council. But anyway, let's have a look. How could Braverman be so dense as to think she could ask if she could submit a fine as an expense? It's not been dense, it's just been entitled, isn't it? It's just been entitled. She, you know, again, she's incredibly wealthy. If she'll pay the fine, whatever the fine is, even if it's a bad one, a few £100s. But usually, I don't know what they are, about 100, aren't they? And she won't even notice. She won't even notice it on her bank balance. She can just pay it, no problem, no issue. I would have thought she's more concerned, because with speeding, don't you usually have to attend some sort of course, which I think you can do online now. But won't it be embarrassing for the Home Secretary to be told by police officers about the need to not speed on the roads? I'd have thought that's what would be more concerning for her. Effectively being lectured by what she'll consider her subordinates. And, well, as Home Secretary they are. But the fine is nothing to her. It just speaks of her entitlement. That this amount of money, which is absolutely nothing to her, and is not an expense. It's not an expense she's accrued as a government minister, apart from anything else. When she's on government business, she has a chauffeur. She gets driven around for government business. So she's accrued this one in either her capacity as a constituency MP or in her personal capacity, driving round, to see friends or something, or going home. It's absolutely ridiculous to me. Phil saying there, not to mention there are many international agreements that have European Court of Human Rights membership, or Council of Europe membership as a requirement, or so to speak. But yeah, well, this is the thing. The problem is what's happening here is some of these people, these gammons, are basically complaining about international law. We cannot change international law on our own. We'd have to have lots of other nations agree. So they're thinking, so we remove ourselves from the bodies, right? We remove ourselves from those treaties. And they fail to and because they're, the media are telling them bit by bit, oh, we could just leave the EU. Oh, that didn't do it. Oh, we could just leave the European Court of Human Rights. And the media should be telling them, no. They should have told them leaving the EU isn't going to reduce immigration, especially the immigration you are concerned about. It cuts down on immigration from white people, not so much the ones you're concerned about. And then, when it came to, we should leave the European Court of Human Rights, the media should be saying to people, there's no such thing. You don't leave a court. You can leave the institution for which that court adjudicates. You don't leave the court. And then they should tell them, actually, the law that they're concerned about is the UN Refugee Convention. So what they're talking about is leaving the UN. And that means vacating. If they can find no other value in being a member of the UN, it also means vacating our seat on the Security Council. Our permanent seat becomes not only not permanent, but not there. If Starmer was forced to step down for some reason, who do I think would be best to replace him? I don't really know. There's a few. I would have said in the past Yvette Cooper, and she would still, I think, be quite good. Lots of them have lots of issues. And if Starmer was forced to step down right now, it would be whatever would do it, unless it was illness, like serious illness, would be probably very bad news for Labour. I would just have to say Yvette Cooper, because everyone else has got some issue with them. And people will say, oh, Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner's like Neil Kinnock, though. She appeals to certain people, but she actively pisses off other people. Lisa Nandy just lacks strategic nous. The Wes Streeting. Maybe for the future. I don't like him, really. I don't like his style. He's far too in your face for me. But he may be one for the future. David Lammy, I don't think would want to. He has mental health problems sometimes that I think he probably wouldn't want to put himself in at that level of crossfire. I can't really think. I would sort of just hope that basically by the time Starmer steps down, there is someone, and he may not stay for long. He may stay for like a parliament and a half. I would just really think that that someone has come to the fore by then. Would I agree that socialism can only really succeed incrementally here through reforms, get us to a point where revolution is viable with the least bloodshed? No, you don't need revolution. If people can vote, if people have access to democratic elections, there is never a revolution. There's two types of revolution. Either it is an armed minority capturing the government. That is never a revolution of the people, even if it's socialists who do it. It is never a revolution of the people. The only other revolution is one where you are literally toppling a dictatorship. We don't have a dictatorship. Yes, we have a government that behave no different, but it isn't, because we have the opportunity to remove them from power. And even though, the majority public will doesn't get enforced because we have first past the post, it is still a democratic process. People do still have the ability to use their vote to remove the Conservatives. It might mean voting for a party that you don't really align with. It might mean voting against the Conservatives rather than for a particular candidate or party, but everyone has the power to use their vote to remove the Conservatives. So there's no need for a revolution. If you want more socialism, it's really simple. Like, there's too many people on the left. Thankfully it is a minority, but there are still too many people on the left who think it's a battle. It's not a battle. It's really easy. If you want more socialism, persuade more people of the benefits of it. Really that simple. Elections are won by politicians who focus on getting enough votes to propel them to power. Persuade more of those people. It's the same with Brexit. Yes, there's a majority in favour of rejoining now, or there's certainly way more than there are. I don't know, because sometimes you look at these polls and it doesn't take don't knows into account. But there is a growing majority in favour of just rejoining, but that doesn't mean anything because the people who swing the elections aren't. How do we change it? Change their opinions. Talk to people. It's the same with socialism. It's the same with any political idea which is not well established. Talk to people. Persuade them of it. There's no need for like argy-bargy. There's no need for in-your-face. There's certainly no need to make enemies of your allies. Talk to people. Persuade people. Engage people. What's that? Hang on. Remember joking about what the hardcore Brexiteers should be campaigning for is UK to the moon. I hardly know if I was being sarcastic anymore. Well, I'm actually working on quite an interesting video at the moment. There is a possibility that in the not the near but the foreseeable future that some of us in this chat may actually align ourselves with Brexiteers on a particular issue. Because it's a funny thing, politics, because there maybe was a time, I don't know, maybe it was just an illusion, but there maybe was a time where people aligned very easily with political groups, and that's what you did, and maybe these days voting behaviour's so chaotic at times because you can align yourself with a particular policy with one group, but maybe that same group is very much opposed to you on another policy. But there it is. Hillary Benn should be the next Labour leader. But why? Because he's been at Brexit like a dog with a bone. But how do we know he'd be? There's a lot of things you need. A lot of people say, oh, so-and-so should be Labour leader. And they say that because either they admire what they say or something like that. What you need, if you want Labour to win elections, that is. I mean, if you're a Conservative, then by all means you want Diane Abbott to be Labour leader. But if you actually want Labour to win elections, then what you need is someone who will win elections. If I go back to because I've completely changed my views on things over the last 15 years. When Labour were choosing between Ed Miliband and David Miliband, I thought to myself that David Miliband would probably be better for winning an election, but I was in favour of Ed Miliband, and I'll tell you why. This is the way I thought about it at the time. I thought, I can see both of them winning the next election. I can see them returning Labour to power, and I think I had enough regard in both of them to do that. So it was almost like, I think these people can both succeed, but I think this one will make a better job in government. So I pick that one. I have completely changed my mind since Ed Miliband lost so badly in 2015. I now take the attitude that you can take nothing for granted. So when you're choosing between particular leaders, I don't choose the one whose offer I most like. I don't choose the one who, like, personality I most. I choose the one that I think has the best chance of winning the election. I now have dispelled from my brain has gone any notion that two leaders on offer will be able to win elections. I actually go in with the attitude, none of them are guaranteed to win the election. Therefore, in a tight contest, which one is going to appeal to people who aren't me? I have to work out which leader not appeals to me. That's out of the question. Which leader appeals most to the people who are nothing like me, but who needs to be on our side to win power? That's how I look at it now, and that's how I will look at it in the future. So even though I've said quite a few times I don't like the way Wes Streeting, for example, is quite divisive. He's very good in a debate. He was quite good on Question Time again. I saw a few clips of him this week. He is very good. I would certainly have him right at the top of politics. But I just think he's unnecessarily in your face when, you know, to everyone. I think, you know, I wouldn't say he's toxic, but I just think he's too divisive. Is not interested enough in building alliances, which I don't think is a great attitude for a leader. But it may well be that in the future, when Starmer steps down, it may well be that of the choice I have, because I don't get to pick all the Labour MPs, I will get a selection. Labour MPs will choose my selection for me. I will choose the one that I think is most likely to, hopefully at the time, keep Labour in power. And it may well be him. I may well pick him, because I can't ever rule anyone in or out, because it depends on the choice on offer. I'm saying that I wouldn't call myself a Brexiteer. I didn't understand the arguments on either side. All I knew at the time I wanted a quick way of voting out David Cameron. Yeah, unfortunately, it turned out there are worse things than David Cameron. But would what I have proposed essentially be a silent revolution, socialist policies incrementally brought over time, resulting in what true revolutions think they can achieve? You achieve it, if you've got democracy, you achieve it democratically. The way to achieve anything democratically is persuade people. You have to, people have to move out of their echo chamber and go and talk to people who don't agree with them. The problem is there's too many people only, and I know echo chamber is very hard to break out of it. Obviously my channel is largely an echo chamber because people who don't agree with me don't want to listen to me, but it's not because I want to have that comfort of only having people who agree with me. You know, if you're just talking all the time to people who agree with you, you don't change anything. In fact, all you do is build up a very unhealthy level of confirmation bias. You have to go and talk to people who disagree with you and persuade them. And part of persuasion is listening to them as well, not talking at them. You know, and it's hard and it's difficult. But until people are prepared to do that, we have to accept that those of us who are quite far to the left, those of us who essentially want, in my case, all public services really to be controlled by the state. I don't want any private enterprise going on there, other than for, like, I don't object to privatization of things that are not essential, you know, luxury items, that's fine. But we're not going to get that because the majority of people don't actually care. There's a distinction. The majority of people want public services that are good quality, accessible and free at point of contact, or at least low cost, affordable at point of contact, should we say. That's all the majority want. So therefore the emphasis is to change their mind by saying, but there is no way of coming up with a privatised model that doesn't mean it costs you more than it would with a nationalised model. Because that's the simple fact of the matter is. This was the first video I ever did on my channel. Before I even knew I wanted to make it a political channel. You know, you come up with any model for any service. Rail service, energy, water, anything. You come up with any business model. And then you look at the break. So people are going to pay for this service, right? So break down all that money coming in, break down how it's going to be spent. So you've got things like, well, you need to employ people. You need accommodations, you need buildings, you need infrastructure, you need research and development, blah, blah, blah. And part of it, and actually it's a big part when it's privatised public services, but part of that where the money goes is profit. So it's really a simple case of going to people and saying, so let's imagine we take that profit out. Where does it go? It can either bring the overall costs down, which means you pay less for it, or you can put it back into the treasury so that it can be spent on a different public service, which is maybe needs to be run less efficiently in order to be viable. You've got either choice, but we can put that profit to the benefit of society, or we can let rich people have it. And it's like that, but no one's having that conversation. The media aren't going to have that conversation. What it needs is lots of people to go and have that conversation. I've had conversations like that when I was working in staff rooms, but there's too many others on the left who they're getting little cliques, they're getting little groups who all agree with each other. Not persuading anyone. They've not persuaded a single person their entire life. Anyway, run out of time. Let's go through the last couple. Oh, look how Ed Miliband eats a bacon sandwich. In all reality, I mean, people make a lot of that. I really don't think he lost the election because of the way he ate a bacon sandwich. Blair had spin doctors like Campbell. Starmer doesn't have any. Well, we don't know he doesn't have it. I mean, Alistair Campbell in particular was quite a larger than life character, and the term spin doctor sort of came about then. They're basically advisors. Starmer has advisors. His are just not and in all honesty, they are supposed to be in the background. Like Alistair Campbell, as I say, was a big, larger than life character. Very much like, I don't want to compare him to Dominic Cummings in any other way other than he was a famous advisor. But most political advisors are sort of in the background. You don't really know who they are. So Starmer does have them. You just don't know who they are. And you know, and that is the way it should be as well. You know. Anyway, really quickly. When Royal Mail was privatised, people were asking why privatise something that makes the government a profit. Yeah, it still happened though, didn't it? And for a song, because the answer was because the Conservatives wanted to let their mates win a load of money, so they sell it off really cheaply. So the people who initially have those shares, the share value massively increases because in actual fact the hedge fund managers want them. They sell them off to the hedge funds, make a load of money, easy. Because that's what the Conservatives did. They did it with water as well, didn't they? Margaret Thatcher did it with water. It was the same process. She basically said, oh, the people should own it. Yeah, the way the people own it is by the government controlling it, not you privatising it. Oh, the people will have shares in it. It will be the people's water company. Then what happened? They sold them all to private investment groups. So the people who own our privatised utilities now, they're not people. I mean, some are people who invest on the stock market, sure. But mostly it's just like, the shares are just in hedge funds, aren't they? Does Starmer have an anointed successor like Brown to Blair? No. There are a couple he promoted quite quickly, Wes Streeting and Bridget Phillipson, who he thinks might be leaders for the future, but no. And there shouldn't be either. There absolutely shouldn't be. It's not healthy. I've said before, haven't I? Look at, if you want any proof for why you shouldn't have an anointed successor, look at Alex Ferguson when he stepped down at Man United. David Moyes, he's the man. Everyone else must have thought, are you sure about that? I mean, he's done all right at Everton, but you know, are you sure? Oh yeah, he's brilliant. Brilliant he'll be. That didn't go too well, did it? I mean, it wasn't a disaster, but you know, wasn't the right choice, was it? Phil, I have quite a few people who are Scottish, Indian, Irish nationalists that are in the comment section. Oh yeah, I understand that. But I also understand, I'll make this my final point, I think. I also understand that a lot of people will watch my channel because, let's face facts, what do I do most of the time? I bash the Tories. That's mostly it, isn't it? So and that's what it is. So you can be an Irish nationalist, the Irish unionist. You can be SNP, Lib Dem, Greens. You can be anyone other than an actual Conservative and quite like that content. Even though there are some Conservatives who don't like what the current Conservative Party is up to. Whereas what happens when Labour win power? What happened? I mean, don't get me wrong, the Tories will still be there and I will still be making fun of them. Although that's what it will be then, it'll be making fun of them because thankfully they will not be in a position to cause any damage until the next time they come in. That'll be a grim day, won't it? If we don't change our electoral system, that'll be a grim day. But anyway, what happens then? What happens to when I start to talk more positively about the government? The audience could change very quickly, couldn't it? But there we go. I've got lots of things that I might do to change the channel if that happens, which may happen now next year or the year after. But anyway, we'll have to call it there, otherwise we'll go on forever. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening, and until next time, I will see you later.